I'm really tired of sound. This is a strange thing to confess as a composer.
It's such an open-ended, beautiful invitation for all sounds of the world to turn into music.
It's too ambitious in scope and too elaborate a project to be merely a whim.
People are intrigued with the drawing, and the drawing itself is beautiful, and they ask, is this a work of art? And we say yes, and it was drawn by a composer.
The metaphysics of notation started with this crazy idea I had to paint the walls of a small room at the Cantor Arts Center Museum with pictographic notation. Pretty soon, I exceeded the boundaries of this small room, and I had this idea of making 12 large works on paper, a massive pictographic score. And then we started planning towards a series of weekly performances. So you would see the artwork during the week, but on Fridays at noon, various performers would come and they would render metaphysics in sound. In the end, we had 45 performances.
This was a piece of music of very substantial import, I thought, because it provided a platform or a framework for musical communication. That's the essence of what any score is going to do.
It's a question about what is music. It's a question about what is graphic art.
I don't think of it as music. I see it entirely as a visual thing.
I wouldn't probably apply the word music to it until someone specifically and concretely sat down and tried to realize it with a certain rationale of transliteration, a sort of ideology of representation.
I think of it principally as a musical score. That is to say, whatever its interest as a visual design, which is considerable, I think it's still fundamentally about eliciting a response from an interpreter.
I don't have any formal training as a visual artist whatsoever. Any ability that I have to pull off the metaphysics of notation is a consequence of years and years of manuscript preparation, the orthography of making musical scores.
Almost every age has had the chicken and the egg problem, which is we don't know if the notation came first or if the music, which required that notation, was already in the head of the composer, and he couldn't bring it forth until this notation was produced. It's not a new thing that Mark's been doing in that sense. What I think the title indicates is that he is attempting to probe, as it were, the wounded tooth, so that the toothache becomes part of the work.
To understand the metaphysics of notation, it might be helpful to first have a look at scores that preceded it. This is a conventional one. This is Janus from 1992, and this is a completely determinate notation. There's really nothing unconventional about it. Even in this piece, Landscape, which is a piano trio, there's certain things that appeal to me about this visually. The places where it's sparse, the areas where it's dense, the balance of circular versus rectilinear. But I was in no way concerned with or thinking about the visual look of this. This is actually simply the consequence of the kind of music that I wanted to hear, and this was the best way of notating it. This brings us to hybrid notations, scores like 56.5 feet, which, begin rather conventionally with a sort of determinate notation. But pretty soon we have these strange things, these indeterminate things, like we've got these brackets where the trumpet, for example, plays this G sharp and then this E in that order, any time within these two bars. And they could be split apart, pressed together, moved to the beginning or the end, and so forth. And so actually the relationship of these notes to, say, this note in the horn is indeterminate and will be different in probably every performance. This is very much a kind of antecedent of the metaphysics of notation. This is the only place in the piece where you get this graphic thing and it's completely undefined, and it's just marked 5 seconds. So do you play this left to right? Does this take up 5 seconds? Or do you play this whole thing as like one instantaneous blast of some sort that occurs sometime during that 5-second span? It's up to each player. Medium is the first piece in which the conventional notation drops out entirely, and we're left exclusively with pictographs. And I started to become interested in the way in which performers would respond to these strange codes. And what I love about this kind of notation and this kind of piece, and metaphysics as well, is that I am absolutely certain that this is music, and yet I hear no sound in my head while I'm composing it. I can't tell you how wonderful and liberating that is.